secrets from their citizens. In an ideal world, we like to think that all of these lies are necessary to protect national security or avoid a panic. In most democracies, we can hope that the government will eventually declassify these secrets. The US government has plenty of secrets of its own, and thankfully, it has a relatively good record of declassifying material when it no longer poses a risk to security. Buried in these declassified files, however, are gruesome, terrifying, and outright disturbing revelations of what the most powerful nation on Earth has gotten up to over the years. Today, on A Day in History, we're looking at some of the worst and weirdest secrets revealed by declassified documents. If you're interested in topics like this, check out our other videos looking at the secrets of the CIA or the actions of other governments like Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany. You can also like this video and subscribe to keep up with similar videos in the future. Before we talk about some secrets, we need to talk about something that's definitely not a secret. Our video sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is a global phenomenon mobile RPG where you collect champions, but some were not, and perhaps the worst was Project Sunshine. Starting in 1953, the US wanted to know whether ongoing atomic tests were affecting the general population. The Atomic Energy Commission debated over how they could investigate such a sensitive subject, and eventually settled on a grim solution. They would secretly steal bodies, mostly those of babies and children, and conduct tests on them. Members of the project were told to secretly work, quote, through personal contacts with foreign doctors to slowly assemble samples. It would arouse less suspicion to spread out the body snatching across the world, rather than gather them all in one place. Documents record the AEC commissioner at Australia, US agents retrieved parts or whole bodies of young children to measure the amount of strontium-90 being absorbed into their bones. Secrecy meant that they didn't ask the parents first. Grieving parents would simply find that their child's body had mysteriously gone missing, or were fed a lie for why the body couldn't be returned to them. In one famous case reported in Britain, a mother was prevented from personally preparing her son's body for the funeral because doctors had to hide the fact that they'd removed his legs and sent them away for Project Sunshine. Scientists used the samples in experiments and produced several studies, none of which revealed the true origins of their material. The AEC maintained that the advancements in medical knowledge were worth the ethical violations. All in all, 1,500 bodies were stolen or cut up to fuel Project Sunshine's experiments. While the experiments themselves were known for decades, it was only much later that the theft of human bodies became known. In 1995, President Clinton set up a committee to investigate radiation experiments, of which Project Sunshine proved to be the most controversial. Their report concluded that while the AEC had given plenty of thought to the legality of body snatching, quote, there is no evidence that it sought to consider any independent ethical requirements for disclosure to the families of the subjects or the subjects themselves. Sunshine was just one unethical medical experiment undertaken by the US government. Perhaps the most dubious of all was the infamous Tuskegee experiment. This experiment ran for 40 years, between 1932 and 1972. The US Public Health Service, PHS, and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, partnered with Tuskegee University to observe the effects of syphilis on 600 poor black sharecroppers from rural Alabama. Around 400 of the subjects tested positive for the disease, with the other 200 as a control group. The black farmers were seen as a powerless group who were unlikely to have the education or resources to cause problems, and they were unlikely to move away, so they made for a good long-term prospect for study. The victims were told they were participating in a simple medical study and were never told that they had syphilis. If the illness was impossible to hide, the victims were told that they had bad blood, a bogus term used to hide real medical issues. Documents revealed that there was no concern over the racial dynamics of picking an entirely black population to experiment on. Syphilis can be a dangerous disease with a range of life-changing or fatal complications. However, it was already highly treatable with penicillin by the early mid-20th century. The researchers could have cured the participants at any point, but refused to. Not only that, they told participants not to seek any other medical treatment, as it could affect the study. By 1948, 140 of the patients had died, many of them from complications of syphilis. Nevertheless, the experiments continued. Participants were invited to annual checkups for decades, where researchers analyzed the progress of the disease while pretending to be doing normal medical tests. The study continued, and every year more participants would die from the disease. In 1958, the researchers had the audacity to give surviving participants a certificate, quote, "in grateful recognition of 25 years of service in the Tuskegee Medical Research Study." By 1968, 35 years after the start of the experiment, just 89 participants were still alive. A review of the experiment that year acknowledged its unethical nature, but insisted that its data was too valuable. At least 130 participants had died from syphilis or related complications by then, but the real number was certainly higher, since not every participant's body was examined. Most of the survivors had health problems like high blood pressure that were linked to the untreated syphilis. Despite the deception and death, the project continued until summer 1972, when a whistleblower called Peter Buxton leaked the experiment to the Associated Press. The story prompted huge public backlash, especially from the African American community. The experiment officially ended in November 1972, and various government agencies spent years reviewing the documents. New regulations and oversight committees were established to ensure nothing like it ever happened again. But many felt it was too little, too late. Almost 90% of the victims were already dead. The Tuskegee experiment was a startling display of racial discrimination and government deception, which still casts a dark shadow. To this day, it's a major reason for the distrust of government and medical science among African Americans. In recent years, the